Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear. And let's hope that we see sunrise in the morning. Tonight's show is 3 equally chilling and downright frightening monster encounters out in the deep, dark woods. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this. Of course, please do let me know down below in the comments. As ever, please support with your likes and shares. Without further ado, let's begin the nightmares. The Pine Barrens, Part 1 and 2. Let's get straight into that. Okay, so this happened 2 nights ago. I don't really know how to go about putting this into words, as this whole experience still has me fucked up and shaking. This is my first time posting, and my typing is probably all sorts of incorrect. I'll blame that on my unsteady hands. I grew up in New Jersey, on the outskirts of the Pine Barrens. Everyone thinks New Jersey is the sloppy slop hole runoff of NYC. And it wouldn't be wrong if you specify it as North Jersey. Everything below Seaside, or Sleeside as we called it, was dense with woods. It was dark out, and we were cruising through the woods at a fairly cautious speed. The trail was lost of any moonlight since the pitch pines are so dense. The trails are pretty slim, about 1 car wide, with huge puddles riddling throughout the endless miles of paths from the rain earlier that day. We were in Jim's Jeep, so as long as we take the puddles carefully, they were no problem. Without GPS, you can get sort of lost out in the Pine Barrens. To solve that problem, all you would need to do is pick a direction and head that way, eventually coming across a road somewhere. Growing up, we always heard stories of KKK rallies deep in the woods that would have massive bonfires. Of course, the Jersey Devil was our local legend. There was even a zoo that was rumoured to take in all the animals that were used in cult rituals in the woods. We merely would just drive around listening to music, maybe indulging in the devil's lettuce or whiskey. We never bothered anyone, mainly because there was no one out there in the woods to bother. Never really had anything strange happen. 2 nights ago, though, was a very different night. While carefully passing a joint back and forth, we listened to heavy metal, driving on the trail with headlights on. You could see about 75 feet in front of you. We started talking about the girl we knew in elementary school. The poor girl was constantly made fun of because of her dog-like behaviour. She would crawl on all fours and bark at the other students. In 3rd grade, she bit a teacher who was trying to get her to sit in a seat at a desk. Jim was talking about how years later we found out she was in a foster house when we were in grade school. They had originally found her in another foster house with 56 dogs. We were agreeing how effed up that was. No wonder she had so many issues with normal, everyday life. Jim turns down the music to ask, "Where in life do you think she is now?" We both sit in silence thinking about it. The loud engine off the Jeep is the only sounds as we drive through the sandy path through the middle of the woods at night. A couple of minutes must have gone by while we were both in deep thoughts, thinking about how some sad semi-feral girl. As we turn a bend at 35 miles per hour, I spot it. Even though Jim was driving, he was so deep in thought, he would have ran it over. "Holy shit, stop! Stop!" Jim snaps to and slams on the brakes. The car slides on the wet sandy path about 4 feet forward into a shallow puddle. The cold water then splashed up onto the engine, caused steam to drift out under the hood for a couple of seconds. We both stared forward in silence, waiting for the white cloud to drift out of the way to reveal what I saw, or what I thought I saw. A blue tarp wrapped up lay across the middle of the path. Now, finding garbage out in the woods is not uncommon. A lot of pineys dump garbage illegally, even though bringing it to the dump is free. Most of the time these scumbags dump their old TVs or drywall in a pile on the side of the trail. This bundled up tarp was laying across the middle of the path, with what looked like blood smeared all over the top of it. We both sat staring at it for a second, trying to make sense of what it could be. Maybe a hunter left his truck bed open and the deer fell out, Jim says with a matter-of-fact tone. I mean, what else could it be? My facial expression must have been bloodless and anxious because I watched Jim's hopeful hunter theory fade off his face quick. We should check to make sure, right? Jim says, nominating me. I'm driving, so I'll stay in the car for a quick getaway, he says, laughing nervously. I decide not to argue and not to be in a weenie. We both roll down our windows, and I step out. Not until after I take a deep breath do I realise how stoned I am. The air still smells of rain, crisp and clean. I shut the car door quietly and stare at the tarp. The only sound in the entire forest is the running engine of the Jeep. A quick glance at Jim and his eyes haven't left the tarp. Taking a couple of steps forward, I can see the blue mound a little better. It looks like it would be blood smears are still wet, which would make sense since it rained earlier. But as I get within 10 feet, I see that the tarp is dry. It must have fallen out of the truck after the storm recently. Convincing myself a hunter will be upset he's sat in the rain to only misplace his venison, I move even closer. I give the tarp a small kick to make sure this deer isn't going to get up and hoof me in the face. The small nudge opens up on the end of the tarp and a pool of blood comes flowing out. I see it once I'm crouched next to this blue blob of tarp, long blonde hair matted with blood. All within a second, my mind races for a variable cause. Someone's golden retriever. I started to freak out as I stumbled backwards, noticing a small painted fingernail attached to a white finger peeking out from beneath the matted hair. I turned to yell at Jim, but no words could come out of my mouth. No sound comes out of my mouth. As I look at Jim, I freeze. A howl comes from the side of the trail. Something is wrong with this sound. This was not a canine howl. In fact, this doesn't even sound like a fucking animal. The guttural howl sounded much more familiar. Maybe 100 feet into that dense wood. It came from a human? No way. But did it? Jim and I lock eyes and I can see the same confusion in his face. He doesn't know what it is in the tarp yet, but he did hear that fucked up howl. I scramble up off the ground and hear him yelling, "What the hell?" Push myself forward and trip on the heavy lump of the tarp, covering myself in smeared blood. A gunshot rings out at the same moment my hands catch my fall. What the F is going on? I look up at the car and the front windshield is sprayed with dark red and chunky bits. I start panicking and bolt into the opposite direction of the howl, frantically running into the dark, into the cold, but away from the howl, which has turned into more of a growl. Definitely not an animal. I run for about 5 minutes into the black woods until the headlights of the Jeep are barely visible. Standing completely still, trying to catch my breath, I watch my car. Immediately, guilt takes over as I realise I left Jim without seeing if he was okay. How could he be? The whole windshield was red on the inside. That must have been him. He'd be calling out, searching for me otherwise, right? After what felt like an eternity, the headlights start moving down the trail. Jim would never leave me out here in the dark like this. shivering out here in the same spot. It felt like hours before I mustered up the courage to go back to the trail. Still, no sign of sunlight. Any light. I felt like this was a good spot to stop. I wandered around for hours in the dark, coming up with every terrible, effed up idea imaginable to what happened to Jim. At least, I thought I'd come up with every idea. Nothing could have prepared me for this, though. The Pine Barrens, Part 2. There was no sign of Jim, his car, or the tarp. I found myself squinting in the dark to see if that would help my vision. It did not. My brain finally connected and I remembered my cell phone was in my back pocket. The battery symbol was on red and at 19%. Of course, there was no service. We must have driven deeper into the woods than I thought. New Jersey is a pretty small state, but the Pine Barrens can take up 1.1 million acres of it. Deciding to use the flashlight on my phone, I look around for anything that could give me a clue to what's going on. Tyre tracks and a small puddle of sandy, coagulated blood sits where the tarp was. Yelling out for Jim proves useless. I couldn't hear him yell back at me if I wanted. My heart was beating so hard and so loud, I almost passed out. I struggled with which way of the path to go. Should I backtrack to where we came from and try to get home? I knew that would take a while, because we were basically lost. Which isn't normally a problem if you have a car, but on foot, it could take a good while to find anything. I thought about trying to find where the Jeep went. It did continue down the trail, I think. Maybe Jim was just fucking with me. He was actually sitting in the car half a mile down the road, waiting for me. That's hopeful. This may be one of the most effed up pranks, if that was the case. Maybe he was actually hurt and needed my help. I effed up and just left him in the car after bolting into the woods. Guilt would eat me alive. And that almost might be worse. Worse compared to what, though? That gross howl. I can't get that howl out of my head. Low, guttural sound. My head started to add a sinister laugh to the end of it. I'm not sure why. Evil seemed to have taken over my life in an instant. And the gun. What about the effing gunshot? No one was hunting out here at this dark. Trying to piece all this together set off a panic mode even more. I ran down the trail in the direction the Jeep went. Heartbeat and panic seemed to numb my legs to the point I forgot I was running. Lost in my head, developing effed up scenarios. Hours must have passed. My stamina started to deplete. Even with the flight mode engaged, guilt reminded me there was no fight mode. The early morning birds started their calling and chirping, unfazed by the events last night. They always seemed to wake up right before the sun. Coming up to a hill on the path, I smelled fire and breakfast? A campfire. Following the odour down the trail, which led me to another smaller trail that jetted off to a main one. The smell seemed to come from that direction. Next to this new path seemed to be some brush that was driven over. Not often though, since there were still some low brushes in the way. It looked like someone deliberately covered the small path with brush. Driving by you would easily miss it, but on foot it was noticeable. My sense of time was definitely messing with me, but I walked for a good while down this small trail. I knew morning was coming, but it hadn't come yet. Coming over a hill, I see the fire. The sun's coming up, but it's still dark enough to the point that the fire is the main source of light. Jim's Jeep, and the tarp, which is opened up making a makeshift shelter. This stopped me in my tracks. Not knowing how to approach this, I heard laughter come from under the tarp. Laughter? Enraged by the idea that anyone is having even a remotely a good time at my expense, I muster up the courage to get closer. The fire smells sweet. A full pig roast sitting above it, My stomach groaned so loud I thought I might have given away my position. A sharp sound that came from under the tarp catched my attention. I snuck over to the jeep. The pig roast and tarp were about equal distance in front of me. The windshield looks as though someone started to wipe the red syrup away, but then gave up. Just enough to see out the driver's side, a rifle sitting on the dashboard. Maybe I can get it. This is fucking real. The sharp sounds grabbed my attention again. The sun has come up enough for me to see my surroundings. That's when I see her. She is sitting on a tree stump completely naked under the tarp, with her head tilted back. I've never seen such pale skin. Her bright purple fingernails and blood-stained blonde hair hit a chord in my head. She isn't moving. She is dead. Again, a sharp whacking sound focuses my attention to the left. I wasn't able to see it before because of a big tree in the way, but now I saw all too well. A man stands naked in front of a log, the sound of his knife slamming against the fallen log as his makeshift table. He's fucking cutting up something. I watched as he separated a forearm from a hand. I stepped back, felt vomit swell up. When you throw up, your brain takes a standstill to the surrounding world. You only know what you must get it out at all cost. That 5 seconds of puking my brains out has made my life a living hell. By the time I finished, the man had spotted me. He stood staring at me, almost in disbelief. This is when he made the most disturbing single barking sound I've ever heard. Starting to run at me with the knife in hand, he bumped into the girl. She fell lifeless to the ground, revealing a small hole in the back of her head. No blood left to spill out into the blonde hair. He was older than I originally thought, not the fastest moving person, nonetheless heading at me with a knife. I picked myself up and started to run. "Jim!" I yelled frantically for a response. Running past the fire, I noticed that it was never a pig roast. It was Jim's torso, removed of all appendages. This sicko was cutting up Jim to eat. My legs feel weak. I started to space out and ultimately give up. The man barked again, bringing me back to my original sprint. He must have stopped in his tracks, knowing I could outrun him. A gunshot rings out. I look back at him as he continued to run. He was fucking smiling, letting his rotten yellow hole of a mouth show what teeth were left. Did he hit me? I don't see any wet blood on me. The blood from the tarp stained my shirt, but it was no longer wet. Did he miss me on purpose? I did not stop running until my legs finally gave out on the edge of a fire road. The sun was up and I could hear some dirt bikes approaching. Exhausted, thirsty, but still definitely not hungry anymore. I decided to see if the dirt bikes could help me get the F out of here. The Zeno Hunters Legacy. Let's get straight into that. The date is November 22nd in the year 1809. If anybody should find this journal and the notes contained within, please heed this warning. Stay away from Gramercy Woods and the village of Syracuse. I, like my ancestors before me, am a Zeno Hunter. The name isn't quite accurate because we don't kill what we seek. Instead, we find and document strange and fanciful creatures. Much like the Brothers Grimm, we collect stories and fables and lore, but unlike the brothers, we actually go and find these beasts and locations. We are trained from a young age, but only a very few actually are capable of carrying the mantle of a hunter. Our first hunter is always the same. Find a vampire. Vampires are old and carry the history of the legends and myths of others like them. Some even become friends with our family. The one question that is always asked is, why do they remain a secret? The answer is a constant. We remain a secret out of fear for our lives. Humans are dangerous, savage, stupid creatures, and have no tolerance for those who must do what they do to live. This was the answer given to me by the ancient Salazar Stridon, a friend of the family who was more than willing to be hunted for my initiation. Back to the point. I was wandering around in the unexplored areas of America, wild and beautiful and peaceful. I had been absolutely alone for 2 weeks when I had happened upon the village of Syracuse. I had been quite pleased when I saw the cheerful people going about their day and the bright, sunny days shining down on the small family farms close by. I was greeted by folks as I meandered down the lane to the pub to have some ale or stronger and possibly catch a towel or two. It was mid-afternoon, so the bar was fairly populated. There were sun-burned farmers, gruff cattlemen, and the rugged and quiet hunters. The hunters were the ones at the bar or a table hunched over their beers with a deep thought on their face, or really talkative and friendly. Solely with the intent of selling the pelts they had accumulated. These men are usually the holders of my next tower to hunt. I got on well with the hunters because, as they say, birds of a feather flock together. I stroll up to the bar to order my beer and listen for snippets that might tickle my curiosity. The first two oddities I heard were the rumours of Bigfoot. I already met this creature and even sketched its likeness. Beautiful creatures running out spooked by clumsy and meddling humans who keep pushing them from their homes. The next was news of coyotes and wolves taking livestock, and tales of strange metal ships that would hover in the air at night, and the light that would shine from them. This was clearly just a tale. Drunken farmers trying to explain the dead livestock and alcohol-induced hallucinations. It wasn't until much later, when the crowd had died down, and I was about to do the same, thinking that this town is too quiet and nothing ever happened here, when one of the hunters made his way to my booth in the corner and sat down as if he knew me. "You're a fishin', ain't you?" He said this to me as if it was obvious. "I beg your pardon?" "Fishin'? You're fishin'? Your stories and tales? Either that, or you're up to no good. But you don't have that look about you to be up to mischief." A little taken back, I nodded my head. "Yes, I am in search of local tales and lore, strange happenings and stranger creatures. You are in possession of such tales, I take it?" I leaned in, interested by this heavily bearded yet intelligent-looking man. He picked me out of a crowd and even discerned my intentions without me uttering a single word. I could smell the wilderness emanating from his worn furs, and the whiskey stained his greying beard. This man had been deeper in the woods than any white man had ever been, was the thought that screamed in my mind. He sat back and fiddled with his beer mug. This obvious display told me I wasn't the only one fishing tonight. I signalled to the bartender and called out, "A beer for my friend here."
"Make it a whiskey, Mike."
The correction amused me and made me smile when I looked forward to hearing this yarn be spun. He sipped his whiskey and savoured the taste like it would be his last.
"It happened about 2 months ago."
He went on to tell me about this strange creature that he had tracked for half a day. He told of how he followed this thing for half the day and could never get close enough to identify it. All he could see was glimpses of dark, black fur, pointed ears, and a ragged tail. The creature stood on all fours at the height of a very large dog. Then he told me about when he lost sight of the creature. It was at this point he got quiet, obviously debating about what he would tell me. He left his story there as he swallowed the last of his liquid courage and stood up.
"I'll leave you the rest to find out on your own. I'll give you this, though."
This he said as he rummaged through his satchel and produced a rather tattered and yellowed skin, tossing it in front of me. I unfolded a rather well-drawn map complete with landmarks and a line that depicted a trail into the deep woods.
That I made the day I tracked the thing. Kept it, just in case I ever decided to test my courage and take the skin. You can have it, because I realise that I'll never be that brave. I'm getting too old to test fate. God help you if you decide to follow that map. If you do, take a gun or two and a good, sharp knife. Might not hurt to do some praying for all the good it'll do you.
And with that, he left without another word. I tried to protest and get more details, but when I ran outside after him, he was gone. Nowhere to be seen. That morning, I readied myself for the trek. I was all too curious and enthused to turn this down. I made my way to the beginning of the map, which was a day's travel through very thick woods. I was only a few miles from the town, but when I settled for camp, I felt like I travelled for 100. That night, I went over the tale in my head, remembering what details were given, and the man that gave them. He seemed really rattled by the end of his story. But I was not to be deterred. The morning came and I set off following the trail. It wasn't long before the landmarks started to match the story. It was noon when I got the feeling I was being watched. I looked all around, and then I saw it. A black head peering at me through some bush. My excitement rose as I started to track the animal. It knew I was there, and only moved fast enough to keep me far enough that I couldn't make out more than a few details. Writing when I could while moving through the terrain, I kept to its pace. Soon, the sun was coming down, and I wouldn't be able to see the thing much longer. When I lost sight of it, I decided to try and find it again in the morning. It was only after I had settled down and made camp that I noticed how silent the woods were. As a matter of fact, I couldn't remember hearing any sounds of nature since I first saw the creature. It was at this thought that I started to get nervous. I hadn't experienced this occurrence since I encountered the werewolf in the countryside of Europe. Before that was when I hunted a troll in Germany. Both times I was in grave danger and barely escaped with my life. I decided that I was not going to be able to receive any help out here, that I had gone beyond that point of no return. So I made myself as comfortable as possible. As I was cooking some salted pork and beans, I felt like I was being watched again. I peered around and saw two dots of light looking back from the bushes at the edge of the fire's glow. Taking the initiative, I cut some pork and tossed it forward towards the eyes, which instantly disappeared noiselessly. I figured that I just startled it, but taking heed of the old hunter's warning, I said a silent prayer and checked that my gun was loaded. I was just laying down to get some rest when I heard sounds coming from the bushes. The fire had died down quite a bit, and the light was minimal. I looked around as subtle as possible. I couldn't make out anything, but I was tracking the sounds. Whatever was moving around the camp was large, and before long, I could also make out the breathing. I waited longer, still trying to pinpoint its distance from me, when my hair stood on end. I could smell it. It reeked of death. The smell was as if a corpse had been split open and left to rot in the sun. It was close. It was then that I saw the eyes again, but not only the eyes, but its face. It had black fur, darker than midnight. Its head was just above hip height. It had the face of a wolf, but bigger, and its sharp, dripping teeth were arranged in its mouth as if they had been broken and put back together by someone who only had the faintest idea of where teeth should go. 3 pointed canines jutted down from the top jaw. 2 equally terrifying canines pointed up from the lower. Blackish red liquid dripped from its mouth. A round scar that I could only describe as a bullet wound adorned its head just above the right eye. It moved slowly into my camp, and its body came into view. It looked like the body of a cow crossed with a bear. 2 hooves at the front and 2 paws at the rear. The tail was rat-like, with patches of fur along the length, and the body was covered in scars, long cuts along its side. Bullets and arrow wounds polka-dotted it every few feet. 1 arrow shaft barely sticking out of its hind end, just to the left of its tail. It lumbered out of the bushes, sniffing around, finding the meat I had thrown earlier. This must be the thing that the hunter and I had tracked. It must have weighed more than 3 full-grown men. I saw the hooves and paws as it made its way into the campfire's light. The hooves were sharp and the paws had 3-inch claws, 6 on each paw. It bit into the chunk of pork and chewed it slowly. The whole time, it never took its eyes off of me. As it finished swallowing the pork, it lifted its head, and to my displeasure stood on its hind paws. It stood at the very least 8 feet tall. It was then that I realised the hooves weren't hooves. The front legs had hand-like paws that, what I thought were hooves, were actually retractable, claw-like bone growths, stained dark red. As it stood there looking at me, it sat on a log that was close to the fire. The log creaked under its weight. I had to fight the urge to grab my journal and start sketching and scribbling its description and mannerisms. My heart pounded in my ears, and it felt like I had ice water residing in my guts. My breathing was quick but quiet. Or I just couldn't hear it over the pounding pulse. At this point, it did something that astounded me. It looked at my satchel, and then looked back at me and nodded. I felt like it was saying I could go ahead and grab my journal and do as I please. So, I took the risk and slowly reached into my bag and took the journal. Turned to the first blank page and started carefully sketching the intriguing beast before me. I had just started writing the description of the creature when it further astounded me with speech of a sort. It opened its large jaws with a half-growling, half-coughing sound and began to speak.
I'll allow you this opportunity. You showed me kindness with your offer of food. You do not seem to want to kill me. You are not like your kind. You fear me, yet you do not run. You amuse me. Long have I watched your kind. Your words are different from the ones that were before you. All your kind taste of fear and hate. Fear and hate are the flavour of the weak. The weak have been food, and I enjoy the taste. You do not show hate. Your fear is different from the ones before you. You show a courage that seems to overpower your fear. Instead of hate, you show curiosity. Not many escape me. Those who do never return. You may rest tonight in safety. This is my gift to you for your kindness and bravery. Come morning, I will hunt. If I find you and I catch you, I will know the taste of courage and curiosity. Sleep well. You will need your strength. Nothing will bother you tonight.
With this, the creature leaned forward onto its front paws again and made its way out from my campsite. I finished my description and included its words, shoving away my journal. I turned to sleep. Amazingly, I fell into a slumber rather well. I awoke just before sunrise, remembering what the beast had said. I grabbed last night's leftovers and quickly ate the rest. Packing was done in rapid style. When I had finished packing away my belongings, the sun had just full arisen above the horizon. Dew was still on the ground and trees. No sooner had I taken my first step back towards the village, I heard a roar not too far off behind me. The hunt was on. I moved quickly through the trees and bushes, and it wasn't long before I could hear crashes coming from behind me. It was coming, and it was gaining. I ran past a thorn bush which ripped my satchel, most of my rations, cooking supplies, and most sadly, my journal of all creatures fell to the ground. I stopped to grab it but was persuaded to keep going, and at a faster pace when I saw a bush completely uprooted by the retractable claw on one of the front paws. It saw me, and I saw it. It was only 50 feet behind me and wasn't slowing down. I kept running as fast as my legs would carry me. Still, it was gaining. I was bleeding from cuts from thorns and tree branches that whipped at me unforgivingly. I tripped over undergrowth, stumbling onto my face. Not even looking behind me, I got back up and took off again. My lip and nose were bleeding now, and my ankle was throbbing angrily. The beast was close. From the sound of the brush being trampled, he wasn't more than 20 feet behind me. My heart was beating out of my chest, and my chest burned. My sides were tearing. My vision had gone red from the bleeding from the cut of my forehead, and my nose was plugged from the swelling and blood. My lips were fat and throbbing. Breathing was torturous as running. But I couldn't stop either, unless I wished to relinquish my life to that thing that had gained another 10 feet. I thought I would die when I saw a large wall-like growth of thorn bushes. I almost panicked until I saw a small gap under the bushes. Diving and scurrying as fast as I could, I made my way as far and deep as I could into the catching. Cutting vines, the beast crashed into the thorns and shaking the whole wall. I had scrambled just out of reach of its claws, which to my horror extended a foot out of its front paws. It started to swipe and claw at the bushes, cutting its way to me. I kept crawling further into the seemingly never-ending bush wall. I had crawled about 15 feet in when the natural tunnel abruptly ended. I still couldn't see the other side, but I could hear the beast slowly making progress towards me. So here I am, not knowing what else to do but chronicle this ill-fated adventure. My creature journal gone. All I am left with is my notepad I use for keeping track of what supplies I need. If I don't make it, hopefully this will. I, William H. Rollins, wish to warn those who might ignorantly stumble upon this place of the hunted. It is almost, to me, my time is short. Stay away from Gramercy Woods, for the sake of all that is holy and righteous. Don't make my mistake. Most of all, I saw a weakness that might save you. If you are cornered and have a knife, which I lost during my escape, just stab it in the... Skunk ape. Let's get straight into that. Summer in Florida may sound like a great time to go camping, but with the humidity regularly over 80% and temperatures that will make it into the 90s, it could be miserable. This is where my friends and I found ourselves one particularly swampy summer when we decided to find the perfect summer camping spot that we could cool off and relax at. After asking around and doing a little exploring, one of my friends heard about a perfect spot right off a spring-fed river on a seldom visited scrub preserve. There was one catch. There was no camping allowed. A friend of a friend told us about the spot and said that he had previously asked the property owner that lived across from the trailhead if he could park overnight. We thought we would follow suit. This is where things got interesting. How long ago did he ask about parking here? I asked my friend, John, as he pulled the car up to the trailhead. I'm not sure. He answered as he put the car in park. He talked about coming here when we were in high school. We should ask again. Better to be sure no one messes with our car. My other friend Phil said from the passenger seat. Fine, but why don't you do it? That place looks creepy, John said, nodding his head towards a dilapidated double-wide trailer sitting a dozen yards away. I'll do it. I volunteered, unbuckling myself and getting out of the car. John popped the trunk and three of us grabbed our gear and began organising it. I set my backpack down against one of the rotting fence posts that marked the perimeter of the nature preserve and began making my way over to the trailer. As I drew closer, it became very apparent that it had been long abandoned. The siding of the trailer was covered in the black and green scum of unchecked growth, and all of the windows were covered in plywood. I had to step around several mounds of trash strewn about the derelict property to reach the front. I mounted the wooden steps that led to the door and tried to peek into the door window. The glass was partially frosted, so I was barely able to make out the torn-up insides. From what I could see, there were several holes in the walls and splatters of some dried brown liquid.
What you looking for?
I jumped at the voice behind me, almost falling off the stairs. I turned to find two men, locals, standing behind me with rifles. They were both clad in woodland pattern camouflage, one short and scraggly, the other portly and bearded.
Well?
The scraggly one asked again. My friends and I were going to ask if we could park overnight. I blurted out, eyeing their hunting rifles.
Ain't no camping on preserve, fella. It closes at sundown.
He answered me. We asked the property owners here a few years back if we could, and they let us. I responded with a partial truth. Do you know what happened to them?
Been gone a while now. No one's going to stop you from parking and camping. Folk don't come round the preserve anymore, like they used to.
He answered, after a moment of consideration. Where did they go? Why don't people come here anymore? I asked, curiosity overcoming my unease. The other larger man spat tobacco juice and spoke for the first time.
Wild animal attacks been getting worse. That's what happened to the folks that lived here.
He drawled. Is that what the guns are for? I asked.
You could say that.
The larger man answered. The scraggly man fixed his companion with a look that I took for a warning. My unease began to grow again. Hey guys, we don't want a problem. If you don't want us parking close to your property, we can go, I said, trying to pacify the strangers. The scraggly man chuffed out a laugh.
Ain't no problem, fella. This fat bastard has some damn fool notions about what's killing round here. It ain't no fool notion. You seen them bodies? It's a fucking skunk ape.
The larger man said intensely. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing in his face. Everyone in Florida knew about the skunk ape. It was Bigfoot's smaller cousin. It was called the skunk ape because of the horrible smell that was reported to accompany it. I decided I'd heard enough. Well, if you guys don't mind, we will head down to that river for the night, I said as I turned to leave.
Skunk ape or no skunk ape, y'all be careful. There are coyotes and panthers out there. A lot of homeless folk used to come back here too.
The scraggly man offered, as the two of them turned to go back the way they came. I waved to them in acknowledgement and we went our separate ways. I was smiling to myself when I reached John and Phil, who were waiting for me at the trailhead. Those were some tense looking dudes. Everything good? John asked as I walked up to them. Phil handed me my pack and I shrugged it on. Yeah, just gotta watch out for the Sasquatch, I answered dryly, walking down the trail before they could respond. I heard them both laugh as they joined me walking down the trail. We reached the river after a 2-mile hike. The weirdness of my encounter with the locals was all but wiped from my memory as the beauty of the perfect camp spot hit me. The river was crisp and clear, and there were several perfect spots to set up hammocks and tents. The three of us got to work setting up camp and seeing to camp chores. We spent the rest of the afternoon lounging in and around the spring river when the sun began to fall. We set about getting ready for the night. John began cleaning a couple of fat bluegill he caught earlier, so Phil and I grabbed our cutting tools and went looking for firewood. Our search for firewood took Phil and I about 100 yards back down the path. I spied a dead pine tree off the trail and moved into the brush to see if I could push it down. Phil had walked off further down the trail to look for smaller kindling. I came to the dead pine and threw my body against it several times until I heard it begin to crack and splinter. 2 more shoves and it fell off with a tremendous crash. I got to work with my machete and began cutting the dead trunk into more manageable pieces. I stacked them together as best I could and lashed the pieces together with some paracord in order to drag them down the trail. I was just finishing up the last knot when I heard a low grunt in the brush behind me. I didn't jump immediately. My friends and I were regular campers and used to the variety of noises that came with being in the deep woods. I stood slowly and turned towards where I heard the sound, but just saw a wall of unbroken brush and trees. I heard another grunt somewhere in front of me and decided it was probably a wild hog, which I did not want to startle. I slowly reached for my machete, then for the rope lead tied to my wood bundle, and started back towards the trail. There was a louder grunt and large crash in the brush behind me. I spun around and held my machete in front of me, standing completely still and listening. The woods were quiet, and I mean dead quiet, like animals do when a predator is around. The hairs on my back of my neck began to prickle as my mind chased several terrifying rabbits down different thought paths of what could have caused the noise. One of the pines jutting up from the thick brush began to shake violently until it splintered and cracked, the trunk falling towards me. I leapt to the side as it crashed down on top of the pile of wood. A dark mass of squealing horror burst out from the brush and streaked past me as it landed heavily on the forest floor, my heart beating in terror. It was a wild hog. "Shit, are you okay, man?" Phil asked, emerging from the brush where the tree and the hog came from. He reached down and pulled me to my feet. Yeah, man. Did you push that down?" I asked, nodding towards the felled tree as I dusted myself off. "No. I heard an animal and something and came to check it out. I think that hog pushed it over," he answered, both of us puzzled. We recovered the wood and I noticed that the tree that fell was still alive. I decided not to think too hard about the implication and kept the observation to myself. We got back to the campsite and found John standing by the fire, looking panicked, holding his hatchet out in front of him. His eyes grew wide when he saw us. "Thank God! There's some coyotes around here or something, man. Something across the river was killed by them, or killed them," he said, practically panting. Phil and I dropped the wood and grabbed whatever cutting tools we had and spread out around the camp, listening and searching for anything on the shore across the river. A few tense moments passed, and the three of us returned to the fire. "A hog damn near killed me earlier. Probably some across the river too," I said in an attempt to ease the situation. "Maybe," John said, shaking his head. "The sound I heard was something else, man. First it was coyotes yipping and howling. Then something else was there. It sounded like hog grunting, then coyotes went berserk. Then everything just went quiet." I shivered at the thought of the grunts I heard earlier. "I mean, do you guys want to go?" Phil suggested. I wanted to say yes, but then chided myself for being afraid just because a hog spooked me. "Nah, man. We have the machetes and hatchets, plus the fire if any wild animals come close," I answered. John took a moment, but eventually agreed to stay. The evening gave way to darkness and we eventually settled into sleep on full stomachs and good cheer from laughs around the campfire. John climbed into his hammock while Phil and I crawled into our tents. It wasn't long before I heard the heavy breathing and snores of my sleeping friends. I was always the last one to fall asleep on camping trips. I didn't usually mind until the smell hit me. I was starting to doze off when my nose was practically assaulted by the smell of rotting vegetation and putrid carcass. I groaned and sat up in my dome tent, fumbling for my flashlight. I froze when I heard footsteps. They were heavy and slow coming down the trail. I could practically feel them in the seat of my pants as they thudded down the path, right towards my tent. My heart began to beat rapidly and fear welled up in my guts. I grabbed both my flashlight and machete and rose to a kneeling position inside my dome tent. My tent had a screen on top of it. I peered out into the darkness to see what was out there. The moon was full and bright, but the thick tree canopy only let its light filter down in lonely silver beams here and there, leaving the area around them then bathed in darkness. The heavy footfalls drew nearer to where I knelt in my tent. My palms grew sweaty around the flashlight and machete they gripped. The horrid smell became thick, and I was nearly palpable as the unseen phantom came closer and closer. Its heavy, ragged breathing could be heard emanating from the darkness just a few feet away from me. The footsteps stopped, short of a shaft of moonlight behind my tent. The pitch of the thing's breath seemed to change, as though its head was turning left to right, searching for something. I felt its presence weighing against all my senses. I could feel murderous intent pouring off of it, its ragged breath filled with it. I caught a quick glimpse of a dark brown fur as part of its body moved into the shaft of light. I was able to spy its silhouette just beyond the shaft of moonlight, a deeper pool of darkness standing in the shadows around it. The thing must have been at least 7 feet tall. I could make out 2 points of light where its eyes reflected the moon. Its heavy footsteps and stifling smell moved past my tent. I could feel its eyes looking over me as it passed, almost promising that it was coming back for me. I watched as it stepped over the dying embers of our campfire in one bound, its heavy footfalls causing a log to collapse and a small flame briefly flickered back into life. The orange firelight showed me more brown fur covering 2 thick legs and the lower back of a monster in our camp, its massive back now towards me as it stood over where John was suspended in his hammock. The fear that petrified me was briefly overcome by my friend in danger. I ripped my tent flap aside and began yelling and smacking the blade of my machete against the metal shell of my flashlight. The monster turned in its murderous gaze towards me just as I raised my flashlight and clicked it on. It was one of those heavy-duty and expensive Maglite flashlights with LED bulb that was bright as the sun. The flashlight's blue-white beam pierced the darkness and lit up the creature's face. I caught a glimpse of vaguely humanoid features with deep-set black eyes and a large mouth with lips peeled back to show an aggressive array of fangs and teeth. It roared at the sudden blinding light and raised its elongated, fur-covered arms to its face. I could hear John cursing and struggling to get out of his hammock. The creature bellowed again, its rage shaking me to my very core. It lowered its arms as its eyes adjusted to the light, seething hatred pouring from its gaze as it locked onto me. I tried to backpedal away but tripped and fell hard, knocking the breath out of me as my back smacked into the ground. I gasped for John to run as the thing stepped towards me, its long fingers curled as though ready to tear into my flesh, the brown fur that covering its body rippling as its muscles tensed to strike me down. There was a quick flash of light and thunder cracked. The creature pitched forward as 2 more peals of thunder split the air as it roared again. This time, in pain, I flicked the flashlight beam over to reveal Phil kneeling in his tent flap, a large caliber revolver smoking in a 2-handed grip. The creature spun and bounded towards the river, smashing through John's setup and sending him sprawling as it smacked him aside. "What the hell?" Phil began. His skin was pale and his eyes large, bordering bewildered. The gun was shaking in his grip as beads of sweat soaked his brow. Before I could answer him, I heard John moaning in the darkness from where he landed. I rushed over to him and was relieved to see him in one piece and not bleeding. I tried to help him up, but he yelped in pain. "I have a broken rib," he gasped. Phil walked up behind me, his own flashlight searching the trees and brush around us. "I can walk. Just help me up slowly," John instructed. He was an ER nurse, so I followed his instructions as best I could. "Do you think it's gone?" Phil asked, his voice a little shaky. He was answered by a rage-filled roar from across the river. We both aimed our flashlights across the water and spotted the creature on the shoreline. It raised its hulking form to its full height, well over 7 feet tall, and bared its teeth at us in what I took as a menacing smile. I could see the weeping bullet wounds matting down its fur in black blood. It chuffed once and turned to stalk back into the woods. John panted as he leaned against the tree for support. "We need to get out. We need to get out of here. Now!" Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that set of very, very creepy and scary monster encounters deep in the woods there, camping and hiking and what have. Do, of course, let me know down below in the comments. As ever, please do like and share. If you haven't subscribed to DMT, don't wait any further. Hit that subscribe button and tickle the notification bell to stay up to date with all DMT content. We have some amazing, amazing announcements coming up very, very soon. As ever, guys, remember, above all, be safe.
Not sorry.